My name is Samuel Mitchell, and at 69 years old, I never thought I'd be planning my son's arrest. 3 years ago, Ryan walked out of my house after our biggest fight ever, telling me I'd always chosen my friends over family. Since then, nothing. No calls, no visits, not even a text on Christmas. So when a package showed up on my doorstep yesterday with his handwriting on it, my first thought wasn't joy or relief. It was suspicion. Inside was a bottle of Jack Daniel's single-barrel bourbon, the expensive kind that costs $180. A generous gift, except Ryan knew perfectly well that I'd given up drinking after my heart surgery 3 years ago, the same surgery he never bothered to visit me for. Instead of letting it sit and gather dust, I gave the bottle to Harold Peterson, my neighbor of 40 years, and the kind of man who deserves nice things. Harold drank it that evening. By midnight, he was in the ICU fighting for his life. What I discovered next about that bottle, about my son, and about how far someone will go for revenge would shake everything I thought I knew about family. The bourbon wasn't just a gift, it was a weapon, and I was supposed to be the target. Don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. This is the story of how I learned that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who know exactly how to hurt you. The package had arrived around 10 in the morning while I was drinking coffee and reading yesterday's paper. No delivery truck, no doorbell, just sitting there on my front step like it had materialized out of thin air. The brown wrapping paper was neat, professional, but there was something about those 3 words, "Happy Birthday, Dad," that made my stomach clench. Ryan's handwriting hadn't changed much since he was a kid. Still had those careful loops on the letters. Still pressed hard enough to leave impressions on whatever was underneath. I'd helped him practice that handwriting for school projects. Watched him write his first job applications with it. Now it felt like looking at evidence. I carried the package inside to my kitchen table, the same one where Ryan used to do his homework while I made dinner after his mother died. The morning light hit the table just right, cutting through the silence that had filled this house for too long. I opened it slowly, my fingers working at the tape with the kind of care you use when you're not sure what you're going to find. The bottle was beautiful, I'll give him that. Heavy glass amber liquid that caught the light like liquid gold. The label read "Single Barrel" in elegant script, and I knew without looking it up that this wasn't some random purchase. This was the kind of bottle you buy when you want to make an impression, when you want someone to know you spent real money. But here's what Ryan either forgot or chose to ignore. I haven't touched alcohol in 3 years. Not since Dr. Adams cracked my chest open and rebuilt my ticker with more wires than a telephone pole. Not since I spent 2 weeks in cardiac ICU wondering if I'd live to see another birthday. Ryan knew about the surgery his wife Jessica had called to tell him. He just never bothered to show up. I stared at that bottle for a long time thinking about the last conversation we'd had. He'd wanted me to co-sign a loan for some business venture, something about web development that I didn't understand. When I said no, when I told him he needed to stand on his own 2 feet, like I'd taught him, he exploded. Called me selfish, said I'd always put Harold Peterson and my other friends before my own family. Said I'd regret choosing them over him. Looking at that bottle, I realized he might have been more right than either of us knew. Harold Peterson lives 3 houses down, been my neighbor since 1985. He's the kind of man who shows up with his toolbox when your water heater breaks, who plows your driveway without being asked, who remembers your birthday better than your own family. If anyone deserved a nice bottle of bourbon, it was Harold. I walked over around 4 that afternoon, bottle tucked under my arm. Harold was on his front porch reading a paperback thriller and drinking sweet tea When he saw the bottle, his eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Sam, you shouldn't have," he said, taking it reverently. "This is the good stuff. Consider it payback for all those times you've helped me out," I told him. "Besides, I can't drink it, and it's too nice to let sit on a shelf." Harold grinned and promised to save it for something special. "Maybe tonight," he said with a wink. "Nancy's working late at the hospital, and I've got that new John Grisham to finish." I left feeling good about the decision. The bottle would go to someone who'd appreciate it, and maybe in some small way it would honor whatever impulse had made Ryan send it in the first place. Maybe it was his way of reaching out, of trying to bridge the gap between us. By midnight, I knew how wrong I was. The call came from Nancy Peterson, her voice shaking. Harold was unconscious, his body shutting down from something the doctors couldn't immediately identify. "They were running tests," she said, "but it looked like poisoning." That's when I remembered the shot glass on my kitchen counter, the one I'd used to taste the bourbon before walking it over to Harold's house. And that's when I knew that Ryan's gift wasn't about reconciliation at all. It was about finishing what we'd started 3 years ago. The phone call from Nancy Peterson came at 11:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I was staring at the clock on my nightstand, unable to sleep when it rang. Her voice was barely above a whisper, shaking like autumn leaves. "Sam, it's Nancy. Harold's at Riverside General. He collapsed about an hour ago. The doctors think it might be poisoning." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I sat up in bed, my heart doing that irregular dance it sometimes does since the surgery. Poisoning. What kind of poisoning? They don't know yet. He was fine at dinner then. Around 10 he started complaining of nausea. By 10:30 he could barely stand. Sam, he kept saying the bourbon tasted bitter, not like whiskey should taste. I closed my eyes and saw that shot glass sitting on my kitchen counter, the one I'd used to sample Harold's gift before taking it over. "Nancy, I'm coming to the hospital. The doctors are running tests," she said. "They think it might take until morning to know anything for sure. But Sam, what if he doesn't make it through the night?" I dressed quickly and drove to Riverside General, my hands gripping the wheel tight enough to leave marks. The emergency room was that particular kind of hell that hospitals become after midnight, too bright, too quiet, smelling like disinfectant and desperation. Nancy was in the family waiting area, still wearing her scrubs from her shift at the county clinic. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. "How is he?" I asked, settling into the plastic chair beside her. "Stable for now. His heart rate keeps spiking, then dropping. Doctor, Adam said his body is fighting something, but they're not sure what." She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Sam, in 32 years of marriage, Harold has never been seriously sick. Not once. And now this happens right after." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. We both knew what she was thinking. I stayed with Nancy until dawn, watching the sun come up through the hospital's tinted windows. Around 6 a.m., Dr. Jennifer Adams emerged from the ICU, still wearing surgical scrubs. Her expression was grim, but not hopeless. "He's fighting," she told us. "Whatever he ingested, it's affecting his nervous system and cardiac function. We've got him on supportive care, but Nancy, I need to ask you something difficult. Did Harold eat or drink anything unusual yesterday?" Nancy looked at me, then back at the doctor. "He had bourbon last night. A gift from Sam here. Said it tasted off, but he thought maybe it was just a different brand than he was used to." Dr. Adams turned to me. "Mr. Mitchell, do you still have the bottle?" "No, I gave Harold the whole thing, but..." I hesitated, then made the decision that would change everything. "I may have kept a small sample at home, in a shot glass. I tasted it before I brought it over." The doctor's eyebrows rose. You tasted it. Are you experiencing any symptoms? Just a sip, I said quickly. Maybe a teaspoon. I feel fine. Mr. Mitchell, if you have any of that bourbon left, we need it immediately. And you need to be examined. A smaller dose might just mean delayed symptoms. I drove home with Nancy following in her car. My hands were steadier now that I had something concrete to do, but my mind was racing. That shot glass was still on my kitchen counter, where I'd left it, about a quarter full of amber liquid that now looked more like poison than bourbon. I called Mike Torres while Nancy waited in my living room. Mike ran a veterinary lab on the outskirts of town, but more importantly, he'd been testing suspicious substances for local law enforcement for 15 years. We'd served together in Vietnam, and he owed me a favor from when I'd helped him rebuild his garage after the tornado in '98. Mike, I need you to test something for me. Quietly. It might be a matter of life and death. What kind of something? His voice was alert despite the early hour. Bourbon. And maybe something else mixed in with it. There was a pause. Sam, this isn't about gambling debts or anything like that, is it? No, Mike. This is about my neighbor lying in the ICU and my son who sent me a bottle for my birthday. Another pause, longer this time. Bring it to the lab. Side entrance. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. Nancy and I drove to Mike's lab in convoy, the shot glass wrapped in a clean kitchen towel on the seat beside me. The lab was in an industrial part of town, surrounded by auto repair shops and storage units. Mike met us at the side door, already wearing latex gloves. How long will it take? I asked, as he carefully transferred the bourbon into a sterile container. Preliminary results in about 4 hours, if I run it through the basic toxicology panel. Comprehensive analysis might take until tonight. He labeled the container with precise handwriting. Sam, what makes you think this isn't just food poisoning or a reaction to medication? I told him about Ryan, about the 3 years of silence, about the timing of the gift. Mike listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. You need to call the police, he said finally. If this is what you think it is, your neighbor isn't the only one in danger. What do you mean? Mike held up the container, the bourbon catching the fluorescent light. If someone wanted to kill you and used a delayed action poison, they might not have expected you to give it away, which means they might try again. That's when I realized that Harold Peterson hadn't just been poisoned by accident. He'd been poisoned instead of me. And whoever had done it was probably very unhappy about the mistake. By noon, I was sitting across from Detective Lisa Carter in a windowless room at the Riverside Police Department that smelled like burnt coffee and broken promises. Carter was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and the kind of direct manner that suggested she'd heard every lie in the book at least twice. Mr. Mitchell, she said, settling into her chair with a legal pad and a digital recorder. Let's start from the beginning. You received this bottle when? Yesterday morning, my 69th birthday. I told her everything, the package with no return address, Ryan's handwriting, the 3 years of silence between us. She took notes in shorthand, occasionally stopping to ask for clarification on dates or details. And you're certain it was your son's handwriting? Detective, I helped that boy learn to write. I watched him practice his signature for his first CHA2 application. I'd know his handwriting in my sleep. She nodded. Tell me about your relationship with your son. The fight you mentioned. I explained about the loan request, the business venture. I couldn't understand Ryan's accusation that I'd always chosen my friends over family. He was particularly angry about Harold Peterson. Said I treated Harold better than my own son. Had your son ever threatened you before? The question hung in the air like smoke. Not directly. But when he left that day, he said I'd regret choosing Harold over him. At the time, I thought he meant I'd regret losing him. Now, my phone buzzed. Mike Torres. I showed Carter the caller ID and she nodded for me to answer. Sam, you need to sit down. Mike's voice was tight. I found ricin in that bourbon. Pure enough to kill a horse, let alone a man with a heart condition. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Ricin wasn't something you accidentally stumbled across. It required knowledge, preparation, and intent. How much? I asked. Enough to kill 3 people Harold's size. The only reason you're not dead is because you barely tasted it. Carter held out her hand for the phone. She spoke with Mike for several minutes, taking detailed notes about extraction methods, sources, and detection timeframes. When she hung up, her expression was grim. Mr. Mitchell, we're opening a formal investigation. This isn't accidental poisoning. This is attempted murder. I need you to understand that your life may still be in danger. 2 hours later, I was standing in my own kitchen with Detective Carter and crime scene technician Bobby Walsh watching them photograph everything from the bourbon bottle wrapping to the shot glass. Walsh was dusting surfaces for fingerprints while Carter examined the trash can where I'd thrown the package materials. Mr. Mitchell, Walsh called from near the sink. When did you last empty this trash? 2 days ago. Why? He held up a small plastic vial with tweezers, the kind you might get prescription medication in. It was empty but had a faint residue of white powder clinging to the inside. Was this yours? I'd never seen it before in my life. But more importantly, I remembered exactly how I'd arranged the trash when I'd thrown away the bourbon packaging. The vial had been placed on top deliberately, like someone wanted it to be found. That wasn't there yesterday, I said. Someone's been in my house. Carter's radio crackled. Detective Carter, we've got the preliminary toxicology report from the hospital. You're going to want to hear this. Harold was conscious when we reached the hospital, though he looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Nancy was beside his bed holding his hand, while monitors beeped their electronic lullabies. Sam. Harold's voice was weak but clear. Nancy told me about the bourbon. That was meant for you, wasn't it? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Columbus, where Ryan lived. Answer it, Carter said quietly. Keep him talking. Hello. Dad. Ryan's voice was cold, controlled. I heard about Harold. Unfortunate accident. Accident. I kept my voice steady while Carter signaled Walsh to start recording. What kind of accident, Ryan? Food poisoning, from what I understand. Terrible thing. Makes you wonder about the safety of our food supply these days. There was something in his tone, a smugness that made my jaw clench. Funny thing about that, Ryan. The bourbon you sent me tested positive for ricin. Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. I don't know what you're talking about, he said finally. I sent you a birthday gift. What you did with it isn't my responsibility. But you know I gave it to Harold. Do I? How would I know that Dad... The mistake hit me like a physical blow. I'd never told Ryan about giving the bourbon to Harold. The only way he could know was if he'd been watching, waiting to see the results of his handiwork. I never said I gave it to Harold, I said slowly. Another pause, shorter this time. Lucky guess. You always were more generous with your neighbors than your family. Carter was scribbling notes furiously, her eyes wide. She mouthed the words, "Keep going." Ryan, why don't you come home? We can talk about this face to face. I don't think so, Dad. You made your choice 3 years ago. You chose Harold Peterson over your own blood. Now you can live with the consequences." The line went dead. Carter immediately called for a trace, though we all knew it was probably too late. Then she turned to me with an expression I was learning to recognize, the look of a cop who'd just heard a confession. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to request a search warrant for your son's residence. Based on his statements and the physical evidence, we have probable cause." "What about Harold?" I asked, looking at my friend's pale face. "Mr. Peterson is going to be fine," Dr. Adams said from the doorway. "It'll take time, but he's past the worst of it. However," she looked directly at me, "if you had consumed the amount he did given your heart condition, you wouldn't have survived the night." That evening I sat alone in my kitchen staring at the spot where the bourbon bottle had been. Crime scene tape marked areas where evidence had been collected. The house felt violated, emptied of whatever security I'd built here over the years. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should have minded your own business, old man. This isn't over." I forwarded it to Detective Carter and double-checked the locks on my doors. For the first time in 3 years, I wished I still had a drink to steady my nerves. But then I remembered Harold's face in that hospital bed and knew that Ryan had given me something more valuable than bourbon. He'd given me proof. The search warrant was executed at 6 a.m. on a gray Thursday morning. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Detective Carter had called me the night before with an update, and I'd driven to Ryan's apartment complex in Columbus anyway. I parked across the street and watched as 3 police cars pulled up to the brick building where my son lived with Jessica. Ryan's apartment was on the 2nd floor of a converted warehouse in the Short North District, the kind of place young professionals lived when they wanted to feel urban and sophisticated. I'd only been there once when he'd first moved in, and once for a strained Christmas dinner that ended with him criticizing everything from my politics to my choice of cologne. Through my windshield, I watched Detective Carter lead a team up the external staircase. 2 uniformed officers flanked the door, while a crime scene technician carried in equipment. At exactly 6:15, they knocked. Jessica answered wearing a bathrobe and a confused expression that quickly turned to alarm when she saw the badge. I couldn't hear the conversation from my truck, but I could see her nodding and stepping aside. Ryan appeared behind her in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his face unreadable even from a distance. The search took 4 hours. At 10:30, my phone rang. "Carter. Mr. Mitchell, we found what we were looking for. Can you meet me at the station in an hour?" "Did you arrest him?" "We're bringing him in for questioning. His wife has been very cooperative." When I arrived at the police station, Carter was waiting with a box of evidence bags and the kind of expression that suggested the case had just shifted into a higher gear. "Your son is quite the amateur chemist," she said, laying out photographs on the conference table. "We found a makeshift laboratory in the apartment's storage unit." The first photo showed glass beakers and distillation equipment arranged on a metal workbench. The second showed mason jars filled with what looked like seeds or beans. The third showed notebooks, 3 spiral-bound composition books filled with Ryan's careful handwriting. "Castor beans," Carter explained, pointing to the jars. "Enough to produce ricin for a small army." The notebooks contain detailed instructions for extraction, purification, and delivery methods. Page 47 has a section titled "Dosage Calculations for Cardiac Patients over 65. She flipped to another photograph. A computer printout of medical articles about ricin poisoning, with highlighted sections about symptoms and detection times. Stapled to it was a handwritten note: onset 6-12 hours, death 24 to 72 hours, undetectable in standard autopsy. "There's more," Carter said. She pulled out a plastic evidence bag containing a sheet of notebook paper. Through the clear plastic, I could see my name written at the top in Ryan's handwriting, followed by a detailed timeline: birthday delivery, Thursday; consumption expected, Thursday evening; symptoms begin, Friday morning; hospital, Friday afternoon; death, Saturday. My hands started shaking, not from fear, but from the cold realization that my son had planned my death with the same methodical attention he'd once applied to his homework. The timeline assumes you would drink the bourbon yourself, Carter continued. There's a note at the bottom: HP interference unexpected. Adjust for next attempt. HP Harold Peterson. He knew Harold got it instead of me. Based on the digital evidence Jessica provided, yes. Your son has been monitoring your house with a telephoto lens from his car. We found photos of you walking to Harold's house with the bottle dated the day after your birthday. She showed me printouts of text messages between Ryan and a contact saved only as C in his phone. The messages were coded, but clear enough: Ryan, package delivered; target acquired, alternate receiver; C, abort; Ryan, negative; proceed as planned; secondary target acceptable; C, what about primary tone; Ryan, next phase; direct approach. Who is Tsiahos? I asked. Still working on that. The number traces to a burner phone purchased with cash, but we have more. Carter pulled out the final evidence bag. Inside was an envelope addressed to me in Ryan's handwriting. Through the plastic, I could see it had never been opened. We found this hidden in his bedroom closet, she said. Do you want to know what it says? I nodded, though part of me didn't. Carter unfolded a photocopy of the letter's contents. Ryan's handwriting filled the page. Dad. By the time you read this, you'll understand why I had to do what I did. You always said actions have consequences, so here are yours. You chose Harold Peterson over your own blood. You chose your neighbors over your family. You chose everyone except the person who should have mattered most. Harold Peterson has been more of a father to you than I ever was a son. Now you can mourn him the way you should have mourned me when I walked out of your life. The difference is his death will be on your hands. You gave him the glass. You made the choice. Don't blame me for finishing what you started. Your loving son, Ryan. P.S. The insurance money should cover Harold's funeral. Consider it my final gift to the family you actually cared about. The room was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. I read the letter twice, trying to understand how the boy I'd raised could write something so cold, so calculated. Mr. Mitchell, Carter said gently, there's something else. Jessica has agreed to cooperate fully. She's provided us with Ryan's computer, his phone records, and detailed information about his activities over the past 6 months. What kind of activities? Research into ricin production, purchase of laboratory equipment, surveillance of your house and daily routine, and, she hesitated, plans for what he called Phase 2. Phase 2. Carter pulled out another printout. This one was a floor plan of my house drawn in Ryan's precise handwriting, with entry points marked and a timeline for what appeared to be a break-in. He was planning to try again, she said. Direct delivery method this time. No more relying on you to consume the poison voluntarily. I stared at the floor plan, recognizing every room, every window, every door. Ryan had drawn it from memory, marking the squeaky floorboard in the hallway, the loose window latch in the bedroom, the spare key hidden under the back porch flower pot. When? I asked. According to the timeline, this coming Saturday night, when you'd normally be at the VFW playing poker. My throat felt dry. How did he know about my poker game? He's been watching you, Mr. Mitchell, for months. Jessica says he became obsessed with your daily routine after the fight 3 years ago. She thought it was just hurt feelings. She didn't realize it had turned into something else entirely. Carter gathered the evidence back into the box. We're charging him with attempted murder in the first-degree possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute and criminal conspiracy. Based on the evidence, the DA is confident we can make it stick. What about Jessica? She's cooperating, no charges. She genuinely had no idea what he was planning. Carter paused. Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared to testify against your son? I thought about Harold lying in that hospital bed. I thought about the letter, the timeline, the floor plan of my house. I thought about the boy who used to help me fix cars in the garage and the man who had calculated the exact dosage needed to kill me. Detective, I said, I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to make sure he never gets the chance to finish what he started. Carter nodded. Good. Because this is just the beginning. The call came from Ryan's lawyer 3 days before the trial was scheduled to begin. Attorney David Clark had a reputation as a skilled defense lawyer who specialized in family disputes, the kind of man who could make a jury believe that attempted murder was really just a misunderstanding between loved ones. Mr. Mitchell. Clark's voice was smooth as silk over the phone. I think we can resolve this matter without the trauma of a public trial. My client is prepared to plead guilty to reckless endangerment in exchange for a reduced sentence. 5 years eligible for parole in 3. I was sitting in my kitchen looking at the empty spot where Ryan's bourbon bottle had been a month ago. Reckless endangerment. Your client tried to kill me. My client sent you a gift that you chose to give to another person. The prosecution's case relies heavily on speculation about intent. What about the ricin laboratory, the notebooks, the surveillance photos? Clark's pause was calculated. Circumstantial evidence, Mr. Mitchell. My client is a curious person who researches many topics. As for the photographs, he was concerned about your welfare after your estrangement. None of this proves intent to commit murder. And the letter? A grief-stricken young man working through his emotions in writing. Hardly evidence of criminal intent. I closed my eyes and saw Harold's face in that hospital bed, pale and fighting for every breath. Mr. Clark, tell your client he can take his plea deal and shove it. I'll see him in court. The trial began on a Monday morning in October. The courthouse was one of those old buildings with high ceilings and wood paneling that made every word echo like a pronouncement from God. I sat behind the prosecutor's table wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to my wife's funeral 15 years ago. Ryan was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He'd lost weight in the month since his arrest, and his hair had grown longer than he usually kept it. When he looked at me, there was no recognition, no emotion, just the cold assessment of a stranger sizing up an opponent. District Attorney Michael Thompson was a veteran prosecutor with silver hair and the kind of voice that commanded attention. His opening statement was simple and devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a son who decided his father deserved to die. Not in a moment of passion, not in self-defense, but through careful planning and deliberate action. You will see evidence of a months-long conspiracy to commit murder thwarted only by the defendant's failure to anticipate his father's generosity. Clark's opening was equally polished, but took a different approach. He painted Ryan as a troubled young man, devastated by his estrangement from his father, whose research into toxins was academic curiosity rather than criminal planning. My client never intended for anyone to be harmed, Clark told the jury. What you'll see is a young man struggling with depression and abandonment, whose private writings were taken out of context by prosecutors eager to score a conviction. The first witness was Harold Peterson. He walked slowly to the witness stand, still using a cane from his ordeal. His testimony was devastating in its simplicity. "I drank maybe 2 ounces of that bourbon before I realized something was wrong," he told the jury. "It tasted bitter, chemical-like. Within an hour, I couldn't stand without help. By midnight, I thought I was dying." Clark's cross-examination tried to suggest that Harold's symptoms could have been caused by a medication interaction or food poisoning. But Harold's response was unshakable. "Counselor, I've been taking the same medications for 10 years and eating my wife's cooking for 32. I've never ended up in intensive care until I drank that bourbon, Dr. Moan." Jennifer Adams testified about ricin poisoning, explaining how the toxin worked and why Harold had been lucky to survive. Given Mr. Peterson's age and the concentration of ricin in his system, he came very close to death. If Mr. Mitchell had consumed the full dose intended for him, given his cardiac condition, survival would have been unlikely. Mike Torres explained the laboratory analysis, walking the jury through the process of ricin extraction and the sophistication required to produce the concentration found in the bourbon. "This wasn't someone experimenting with household chemicals," he testified. "This was precise scientific work by someone who understood exactly what they were doing." Then it was my turn. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking to my own execution. I'd testified in court before mainly in civil cases related to construction accidents, but this was different. This time I was testifying against my own son. De Thompson led me through the story chronologically: the package, the bourbon, my decision to give it to Harold, the phone call from the hospital. I kept my voice steady, factual, emotionless. "Mr. Mitchell," Thompson said, "during your phone conversation with the defendant, did he say anything that suggested he knew you had given the bourbon to Harold Peterson?" "Yes. He asked how Harold was doing before I ever mentioned Harold's name." "You never told him you'd given the bourbon to Harold?" "No, sir. The only way he could have known was if he'd been watching." Clark's cross-examination was brutal. He spent 2 hours trying to paint me as a bitter, vengeful father who'd turned against his son out of spite. He brought up every argument Ryan and I had ever had, every time I'd chosen work over family events, every way I'd failed as a father. "Mr. Mitchell, isn't it true that you told my client he was worthless when he asked for your help with his business?" "I told him he needed to learn to stand on his own feet." "And isn't it true that you've always favored your neighbor Harold Peterson over your own son?" "I've tried to be a good neighbor. That doesn't make me a bad father. But you did choose to give a valuable gift to Harold Peterson rather than appreciate it yourself, didn't you?" I looked directly at Ryan for the first time during the trial. "I gave Harold that bourbon because I thought it was a generous gift from a son trying to reconcile with his father. I was wrong about the generosity, but I was right about the gift." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman was a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." Ryan's face didn't change. He just stared straight ahead, as if the verdict was happening to someone else. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced him to 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 18 years. As the bailiff led him away in shackles, Ryan finally looked at me one last time. "You destroyed this family," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. "I hope you're satisfied." I wanted to tell him that he'd destroyed it the moment he'd decided I deserved to die. I wanted to tell him that I loved him but couldn't save him from himself. Instead, I just watched him disappear through the door that would separate us for the next 18 years. Outside the courthouse, Harold was waiting with Nancy. His color had returned, and he'd put back most of the weight he'd lost during his recovery. "You did the right thing, Sam," he said, clasping my shoulder. I know it wasn't easy. Easiest decision I ever made, I lied, and the hardest. That night I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun set over the same street where Ryan had learned to ride his bicycle 30 years ago. A part of me kept expecting to see him walking up the driveway, ready to apologize and start over, but I knew better. Some breaks can't be mended. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some sons grow up to become strangers who plan their father's deaths with the same attention to detail they once used to build model airplanes. I'd chosen justice over family, truth over comfort. It was the right choice, but right choices don't always feel good. They just feel necessary. The phone rang inside the house. Probably Nancy checking to make sure I was okay. Or Detective Carter with some detail about the case. Or maybe Jessica Ryan's ex-wife who'd started calling occasionally to apologize for things that weren't her fault. I let it ring. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, I was content to sit with my coffee and remember the boy Ryan used to be before he decided that love and hate were the same thing, and that the distance between a gift and a weapon was just a matter of intent. Some lessons come too late to matter, but at least they come. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from the Ohio State Penitentiary. Ryan's handwriting on the envelope thinner, now more careful. Inside was a single sheet of prison stationery with 4 words, "I should have succeeded." I burned it in the fireplace without showing it to Detective Carter or anyone else. Some messages don't deserve to be preserved even as evidence. Harold recovered completely, though he never drinks bourbon anymore. Whiskey's lost its appeal, he told me with a wry smile. Funny how almost dying changes your taste preferences. Jessica divorced Ryan while he was awaiting trial. She moved back to California with their daughter Emma, who's now 7, and asks why Grandpa Sam doesn't visit anymore. Jessica sends me pictures sometimes. Emma has Ryan's eyes, but her mother's smile. I pray she inherited more than just the physical features. The house feels different now. Not empty, but aware. Every creak and settle reminds me that trust once broken leaves marks that never quite fade. I've changed the locks, installed a security system, and started carrying my phone everywhere. Not because I'm afraid, but because I've learned that the people who know you best are often the ones capable of hurting you most. People ask me if I regret turning in my own son. The answer is simple. I regret raising a son who made it necessary. Family bonds are sacred, but they have limits. When love becomes manipulation and trust transforms into betrayal, protecting others from those we love isn't cruelty, it's courage. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable evil, even when that evil wears a familiar face. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about preventing the next victim. The hardest truth is that blood relationship doesn't guarantee loyalty, and sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those who know exactly where to aim their poison. If this story touched you or taught you something valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Your story might help someone else facing a similar difficult decision.